Hello, my name's Charlie Clutterbuck and I used to farm on this land. Now I want to take you on a quick tour of the countryside, far from the madding crowd, in order to show what is going on, but also as a way of showing you how we could be growing a lot more food in this country. But in order to do that, we need to make a longer film, and so we need some financial support for that. Thank you. We're going to go back 400 years to the times of the Pendle Witches Trial. The hill behind me, that's Pendle, and the trial focused on 12 wretches, not witches, who were brought along this road here to their deaths. Many people talk about, funny goings on, but actually a lot of it was to do with the land. This was the time of the enclosures, and most famously, John Townley enclosed large areas around Burnley and threw various characters off the land who were squatting there, one of which was James Device, the grandson of Elizabeth Device. And he dug up some lawn at Carr Hall, which was owned by Mrs. Townley. It was his little bit of revenge, but it cost him his life because his younger sister, 9-year-old Jeanette, gave evidence that he mumbled witches' curses while he was digging up the divots. And talking of enclosures, these two fields here were enclosed in 1621. And I happen to know that because I used to live on the farm just there. And that's telling us something else as well, that in the 1830s, investment came in from industry onto the land. So lots of merchants wanted to wed lots of lasses on the land. But at the same time, there was a massive conflict going on between industry and the landowners. The industrialists wanted to feed their workers cheaply. The landowners wanted to stop food coming in from abroad, cheap food from the colonies. And that's what's led to the repeal of the Corn Laws, which we may still be learning about at school. The consequence of that was that over the next 100 years, the amount of food produced in this country declined dramatically, so that by the start of the First World War, we produced only a quarter of our own food. Out of the clutches of the US Marshall Plan, which gave food with loads of strings attached, the government wanted to produce much more food ourselves. So invested in drains, chemicals, machinery, advice, but almost more so research. When I was brought up, we had 32 research stations looking at soil and weeds and all sorts. There was also a consensus between the two main parties that farmers should be guaranteed prices for their food, and each year they'd debate in Parliament how much they would get for producing bread and potatoes. So that by the mid-70s we produced 3/4 of our own food. And then in the 80s along came Margaret Thatcher, and her motto was let the markets rule, i.e. let the supermarkets rule, because the government took less and less interest. She flogged off perhaps the best research station in the country, the Plant Breeding Institute. She flogged it to Unilever, who sold it on to Monsanto. And 3/4 of the research stations disappeared in the next 30 years. So that by the end of her reign, we were producing only 60% of the food we eat. So the issue is this reliance on markets, because what happens is people say, produce more food, produce more food. But what happens in a market system is the price of that food then goes down. A good harvest means bad prices, a bad harvest means good prices, and yet we rely on the markets time and time again. We have to intervene, have government support, and invest in the produce we want, particularly fruit and vegetables, but also grain and meat, in order to meet the needs of this country without destroying the rest of the world. And 10 years ago, we were being urged to leave the EU. And one of the reasons being put forward was we could get our hands on the £3 billion worth of subsidies given to farmers. It amounted to about £100 an acre and was a bit silly because it didn't actually pay to do anything. But it was a good bedrock for the small farmers. And in fact, just down the road at Gisborne, Boris Johnson promised the farmers that the subsidies were guaranteed 100%. And then in his first government, guess what? He gets rid of them. So since then, we've been trying to work out what's happened to those subsidies. And it seems that the big landowners, if you happen to have a spare 1,000 acres, can get their hands on about £1 billion worth of them for rewilding, which, remember, doesn't grow any food. The rest, it seems very difficult to find out what's happened. Certainly small farmers seem to have got bits and pieces for growing flowers and walls and stuff. But on the other hand, I think the consultants have made quite a lot of money about advising farmers. So in the direction now seems to be towards carbon counting, and that is all to do with carbon offsets, that you can still carry on polluting, but if you grow a few trees then that balances out. And this is called net zero. And I'm now beginning to say that net zero fiddles while the earth burns, but that's another story. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. And I'd like to think you might enjoy an even longer version where we look into how food can be produced in this country. We'll need some funds for that, so if you can support us, we'd be extremely pleased. We'd also be pleased to see you join us on one of these walks, one here and also one over in Bali. Thank you now.